He shoved me hard right in front of my brother's coffin and growled, "You do not belong here." But the moment he ripped off my coat and saw the Presidential Medal of Freedom on my chest, his face went white because he just disrespected a man who once briefed the President of the United States. That day, he shoved me right there, in front of the casket. "Back off, sir. You are not on the guest list." He barked, the scent of minty breath and entitlement piercing the solemn air. I could still feel the cold press of his fingers on my chest. He was not gentle. He was not respectful. And he was not interested in who I was. To him, I was just an old black man who did not belong. The folded flags, the soft hymn echoing through the white-pillared First Baptist Church of Eastwood, the tear-streaked cheeks of women in veils. It all stopped when Officer Richard Dawson raised his voice. "Sir, step back now. This is not a public event." The way he said "sir" like I was not one. Behind him stood his partner, a younger cop with nervous eyes and a clipboard held to his chest like a shield. Dawson had on his sunglasses, though we were indoors. His mouth twitched like he was hunting trouble. And in that moment, he found it in me. The crowd looked on old neighbors, congregation members, veterans from my brother's Sunday outreach, even a local news crew discreetly standing in the back. But no one moved. No one said a thing. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply stood there, in my pressed black overcoat, my palms clenched at my sides. I looked at my brother's coffin, mahogany wood with brass accents. Just like he always wanted, Reverend Elijah Carter, a man who prayed for the broken, housed the lost, preached even when the room was empty. Now he lay still, surrounded by mourners who came for comfort, but would leave with discomfort. The officer pushed again, this time pulling at my coat lapel. "Are you refusing to comply?" Comply. Such a word. I slowly unbuttoned the coat, not in defiance, but because it suddenly felt heavy. The fabric peeled back from my chest, revealing a dark suit, a striped tie, and resting proudly beneath the knot was a golden star, 5-pointed. Resting in a blue circle, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Gasps. A woman dropped her purse. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." The medal glimmered under the stained glass light. Officer Dawson paused. His hand froze in midair, inches from my shoulder. His partner stepped back like gravity had shifted. But it was not the medal that stunned them. It was what it meant, because for a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, everyone in that church remembered. They remembered the 1982 hostage rescue in Beirut. They remembered the mysterious advisor who briefed presidents behind closed doors. They remembered the face from a grainy photo in a Time magazine article, older now. Yes, grayer. Certainly, but still standing. Still dignified. Me. Jerome Lell. Carter. But none of that mattered to Dawson. Not really. His lips parted, but no apology came out. Only silence. I turned slightly and addressed the room, not loudly, but with the gravity of someone who had nothing left to prove. "I am here to say goodbye to my brother." The pastor nodded. Speechless, I stepped forward. Dawson did not move this time. I passed him, walked up to the casket, and laid my palm over the polished wood. It was warm from the sun filtering through the stained glass, and I imagined Elijah's voice, low and full of peace. This world was never meant to be fair, but we can be fair in it. My brother said that once when I returned from a mission that had gone horribly wrong, he had a way of washing blood from my hands without water. Now, I stood at his final bed, in front of a town that watched a man in uniform forget who he served. And I realized something. This was not just about me. It was about all of us who've been overlooked, dismissed, spoken down to, and told to step aside. I straightened my back. I was not done yet. And neither was the story. My name is Jerome L. Carter. I was born in 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, in a house with creaky floorboards, chipped white paint, and a mother who could quiet any storm with a hymn. My father was a steel worker who did not say much unless it mattered, and when he did, we listened. I was not supposed to become who I became. Black boys like me, in that era, were expected to keep their heads down. Stay quiet, be grateful for scraps. And yet, from the moment I could walk, I defied that script, not out of rebellion, but because I had questions, and I was not afraid to ask them. My brother Elijah, God rest his soul, was the kind one, the one who shared his cornbread before taking a bite, the one who stayed behind to care for Mama when I left. I was the sharp one, the quiet fire. I joined the military at 17 with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of purpose. Basic training tried to break me. Some nights, I thought it succeeded, but I kept going. Through the ranks, through the sandstorms of Iraq, through the freezing nights of Kandahar, through the silent halls of the Pentagon. Eventually, I stopped wearing a uniform, started wearing suits. They called me the ghost of the room, the man who advised 3 presidents on threats we did not yet have names for. I never sought fame, only duty. I earned that medal the one Dawson did not recognize with blood, silence, and sacrifice. Not once did I ask for recognition. Not once did I expect the world to clap. But I did expect at least a sliver of dignity. And that day, at my brother's funeral, even that was denied. See, there is a difference between being forgotten and being erased. When Dawson looked at me, he did not see a man who had risked his life for the country he loved. He saw a black body in a suit, standing too close to the casket. That is what hurt the most, not the shove, not the words, but the fact that in his eyes, I was invisible. But I am not. I live in Eastwood now, a small town in Georgia where everyone waves but does not always mean it. After retirement, I chose peace. A garden in the back, jazz on vinyl, the quiet companionship of old books and older memories. I live alone. My wife, Clara, passed 5 years ago, breast cancer. She was my world. I still set the table for twosome nights. Old habits. When Elijah died suddenly, of a heart attack, I promised myself I would fly down, keep it low, sit in the back, mourn quietly. That is who I am now, not a hero, not a headline, just an old man who has seen too much. But Dawson would not let me sit quietly. That is the thing about people like him. They think authority gives them vision. It does not. It blinds them. What he did not know, what most of that town did not know, was who I had been, who I still was. But I did not come to remind them. I did not come to make a statement. I came to bury my brother, to touch the hand that baptized half this town, to say goodbye to the man who prayed for me every night from his little chapel, even when I was continents away. But sometimes, silence gets mistaken for weakness. And now, something inside me had begun to shift. I thought I would left the fire behind, that all my fights were fought. But when Dawson placed his hand on my chest, he lit something I thought was long buried. And when the metal was revealed, when silence fell over that church, I knew it was not over. Not for me, not for Elijah, not for the countless men like us who walk this country with pride, only to be reduced to stereotypes and shadows. My name is Jerome L. Carter. I was never just a man. I was a soldier, a protector, a brother. And now, once again, I would have to be a witness, because the world needed to remember. And I was done letting it forget. The first time I saw Officer Richard Dawson, he was pacing the front steps of First Baptist like he owned the building, his thumbs tucked into the leather belt of his uniform, sunglasses perched proudly on the bridge of his sharp nose, the kind of posture men use when they want to be seen as bigger than they are. He was not nervous. He was waiting for something or someone. Maybe for a reason to remind the crowd that he was in control. Maybe for me. You learn to read men like Dawson early when you are a black man in America. The way they look at you, not through you, over you. Their words come clipped, calculated, but always laced with suspicion. They wear that badge not as a promise to protect, but as permission to judge. Richard Dawson was Eastwood's golden boy, born and raised there, played high school football, married his sweetheart, became a cop by 21. Blonde hair, chiseled jaw, broad chest. If you were casting a movie about a good boy turned lon, you would hire him on the spot. But Dawson did not believe in protecting everyone, only those who looked like him. He made headlines 2 years back for tackling a young black teen who had fit the description of a robbery suspect. Turned out the boy was walking home from the library. No charges, no apology, just a shrug from Dawson and a let us not make this a race thing. And the town. They forgot, or chose to. But men like me, we remember. That day at the funeral, Dawson saw me as an interloper, not as a grieving brother, not as a veteran, not as a human being, just an outsider who dared to stand too close to the sacred space his authority guarded. He did not recognize the medal. That did not surprise me. Men like him rarely know what sacrifice looks like unless it is in a headline. What surprised me was how quickly his pride crumbled when silence took over the church. When the congregation leaned forward not to see me, but to see him. He froze. His mouth opened slightly. His hand dropped from his belt. His sunglasses slipped just enough to reveal his eyes. And they were afraid. Because in that moment, Richard Dawson was not the law. He was just a man who had disrespected someone the world might actually care about. But here's the cruel twist of power. Even after that, he did not apologize. He nodded at me. Barely. Like the kind of nod you give a superior officer. Not because you respect them, but because you are cornered. Then he turned and walked off the altar like nothing happened. Like I was the one who should be embarrassed. I watched him go, the crowd parting like the Red Sea for a man who had no business standing near a pulpit. He did not look back, but I did. I looked at every face in that church. The ones who turned away. The ones who tried to act like they had not seen what they would seen. And the ones who saw everything but stayed quiet. Because Dawson was not just one man. He was a system. A walking emblem of what happens when power is given without accountability, when ignorance is coddled and brutality excused, when respect is demanded. Never earned. He was never trained to recognize dignity, only to suspect difference. And now that man knew my name. He would learn more. I had not planned to speak at Elijah's funeral, but I felt my hand rise before I could stop it. The pastor called my name. And as I stepped to the altar, Dawson froze in the back pew. He did not want to hear my voice, but he would, because now the story had changed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to tell it. I had not spoken publicly in nearly a decade, but there I stood, behind the polished oak podium at the front of First Baptist, staring out at a room filled with solemn faces, some familiar, most not. A casket rested behind me, closed, draped in white roses and lilies. Elijah's picture sat on a small easel beside it. In the photo, he smiled, a smile that never aged, a smile that calmed storms. My fingers gripped the edge of the podium as I took a breath. I was not nervous. I would briefed men who ran nations. But this felt different. This was not war. This was grief. Personal. Holy. My name is Jerome L. Carter. I began. Voice steady. Some of you knew me. Some only heard whispers. But you all knew my brother. Murmurs. A few people nodded. One woman dabbed her eyes. I came here today not to be seen. I continued, but to say goodbye to a man who never sought praise, never chased power. Elijah gave everything to this town. Every dollar. Every sermon. Every prayer. I paused, but this morning I was stopped at that easel. I said, pointing to where Officer Dawson had stood, stopped from grieving my own brother, treated like a threat, because someone with a badge looked at me and did not see a human being. The room shifted. A wave of discomfort swept across the pews. Even the pastor looked uneasy. He probably wanted me to keep it gentle, forgive and move on, but not today. I did not come here to stir conflict. I said, but I will not leave this earth without naming truth. I looked toward the back. Dawson leaned against the side wall. Arms crossed. His jaw was tight, but his eyes flickered. You see a suit, I said. You see a medal, and suddenly you care. But where was that care before? I stepped from the podium. Slowly, my shoes echoed against the marble floor. Elijah used to tell me, Jerome, this town ain't cruel, it is just afraid of itself. I smiled faintly. I did not believe him then. I still do not. Because fear does not shove a grieving man. Fear does not strip someone of dignity in front of a casket. I walked to the front row, knelt beside the casket, and laid my hand on it. The wood was cool, the silence heavy. I am sorry. Brother, I whispered. They tried to make today about them, but this moment is still yours. I stood and turned back to the congregation. Elijah deserved better, not because he was perfect, but because he was present when no one else was. And then I said what I had not planned to say. I will not let this moment fade like so many others. I may be old, I may be tired, but I am not done. The hush was thunderous. Outside, a police radio crackled faintly. Inside, no one moved, not even Dawson. Because, suddenly, the room had shifted. This was no longer a funeral. It was a reckoning, and everyone felt it. I stepped down from the pulpit. The church was still quiet. Still stunned, not from my words but from the shift in weight they had caused. Eyes followed me as I moved, not out of admiration, but out of something deeper. Shame, recognition, and a spark of something that had not lived in this town for a long time. Conscience, but not in him. Officer Richard Dawson waited near the double doors, arms crossed, shoulders puffed. He looked like a dam trying to hold back the truth and failing. I walked slowly, my hand brushing the edge of each pew as I passed. I was not angry. Not then. I was tired, exhausted from years of being erased, years of swallowing dignity so others could feel taller. Carter, Dawson said as I approached, his voice low. Forced. I did not stop. I need you to come with me. I did stop then. I turned, looked him in the eyes. Are you arresting me for attending my brother's funeral? I asked. Voice clear. He shifted. Just slightly. His partner, young, nervous, stood behind him, avoiding my gaze like the floor held secrets more interesting than this moment. You are disturbing the service, Dawson said. You are making a scene. I gave a bitter laugh. I was the scene. Until you walked in, people had begun to murmur now. Some stood. Others clutched hymn books they had not opened. One man pulled out a phone, started recording, and then Dawson did something he would not be able to take back. He reached for my coat, a firm grip, a tug, like I was contraband that needed to be unwrapped. The fabric twisted under his fingers as he yanked hard, pulling my overcoat off my shoulders with one rough motion. Gasps filled the sanctuary. It was instinct, not strategy, that made me straighten my spine as the coat slipped to the floor. And there it was, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, glinting under the church's natural light, nestled against the dark suit my late wife picked out for me years ago. I had not planned to wear it, but this morning, I would stood in front of the mirror and whispered to Clara's picture, just in case. The medal caught the sun. The room caught its breath. Dawson's hand hovered in the air. He was not holding a threat anymore. He was holding history. What is that? Someone whispered. Oh my God, said another. That is the medal. Cameras clicked. Phones raised. Someone in the choir whispered, he is the one from the Barrett mission. And suddenly, I was not a man to be removed. I was a man to be remembered. Dawson stammered. I did not know who you were. No, I said, quietly. You knew exactly who you thought I was. He took a step back. The space between us widened. Not physically, but in meaning. I bent down, slowly, picked up my coat, folded over my arm with care. The moment was not for him anymore. It was for Elijah, and for every man like me who had ever been dragged, questioned, doubted, or shamed for simply standing tall in their own skin. I serve this country, I said, in ways you will never read about. I buried friends on foreign soil so you could patrol these streets in peace. And still this is what you see. The room pulsed with tension, but no one moved to stop me this time, because the truth had already been spoken, and the coat had already been ripped. Dawson did not apologize. He turned and walked out of the church, sunglasses on, jaw tight, but this time, he was not the one people were looking at. They were looking at me, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with respect. Something had changed, and there was no turning back. You could hear the dust settle. It was that kind of silence, the kind that does not ask for permission. It just arrives, heavy, alive, and for the first time in decades, I was not just standing in a room, I was the room. The choir did not move. The pastor had not blinked. The people of Eastwood, those same folks who used to cross the street when I walked by, who clutched their purses or pretended they did not see me, were now frozen in the pews, as if afraid their next breath might dishonor what they would just witnessed. Because now they saw it too. The medal, the legacy, the lie they would all believed. I stood at the front of the church, folded over one arm, chest bared with the weight of history. I did not need to speak anymore. The medal had spoken louder than any sermon ever could. It was not just metal and ribbon. It was the memory of 1,000 sacrifices, and it shamed them. But the shame was not mine. It never had been. From the back, I heard the scuffle of boots. Officer Dawson retreating through the church doors, his partner close behind, both disappearing like shadows at sunrise. And when the doors closed behind them with a dull wooden thud, the silence shattered. The pastor, Reverend Amos, stepped forward slowly. He cleared his throat, unsure if he should speak. Carter, Jerome, he said gently, voice trembling. Would you like to say anything else? I looked up, my hands trembled. I had not expected to speak again. But then I saw Elijah's face in that photo. That familiar smile, the one that always said, "Now, you know what you gotta do." So I nodded, stepped back up to the pulpit. This time, not out of grief, out of duty. When I first left Eastwood, I began scanning the faces before me. I swore I would never come back. Not because I did not love it, but because it never loved me back. A few people lowered their eyes. I served this country, I continued, 35 years. 13 deployments. Countless operations. I saw the worst of the world, so you would not have to. And every time I came home, I hoped it would be different. I pointed at the medal on my chest. You only see this now. You only care now. But where was your respect before the ribbon, before the title, before the shame of silence forced your eyes open? No one spoke. Elijah, my brother, he never asked for recognition, and yet he gave everything to you. His time, his food, his heart. You all showed up to mourn him, but none of you stood up when I was humiliated at his funeral. I paused. That is what silence costs. One woman in the second pew began to cry, not out of grief, but guilt. This is not about one officer, I said. It is about what we have allowed to fester, what we have ignored, what we have chosen to accept in the name of keeping things comfortable. Well, comfort is a liar, and comfort is what let a man like Richard Dawson put hands on me and almost walk away from it. There was a shift in the room, shame turning to something else. Resolve, regret. And then, from the back, a voice rose. My daddy always told me you were a war hero, Ma. Carter, I am sorry I never said it out loud. I turned. A young woman stood there. Barely 20. She held a baby in her arms. She was crying. I nodded. Thank you. Then another voice. I was in 6th grade when you came to our school. You read to us. I remember thinking you were the smartest man I ever met. And another. Elijah used to talk about you like you walked on air, like you were God's own storm. He was proud of you. Voices rising. They were not loud. They were not enough to erase what had happened, but they were a start. And that was something. The church no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a courtroom. And the verdict was starting to shift. That is when I heard the footsteps, fast, sharp, from the side door. A woman stepped into view, dark gray pantsuit, file folder in hand. Determined face. A woman who did not come for prayer but for justice. Her name was Danielle Hayes, Assistant District Attorney for Fulton County, former student of Elijah's youth program. Brilliant, brave, and, right now, furious. She raised the folder. Ma. Carter, she said. Voice clear. I was outside when it happened. I saw everything. So did a dozen phones. What that officer did was unlawful, and I intend to pursue it. The church gasped. Dawson's day was not done after all. I looked at her. That fire in her eyes, Elijah had lit it once. Now, she would carry the torch. Thank you, as Hayes, I said, and for the first time all day, I smiled, because something bigger than pain had arrived. The beginning of accountability. And that room once silent was now a witness. It did not take long. By the time I stepped off the pulpit and took my seat near Elijah's casket, Danielle Hayes was already working the room like it was a courtroom, and in many ways, it was not of law but of truth. The congregation leaned in, not in gossip, but in awakening, as if the spell that had blanketed this town for decades of fear, of looking away, of letting things slide was finally beginning to lift. Danielle spoke with precision. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, holding up the thin manila folder she had brought. This is an affidavit drafted less than 10 minutes ago. It outlines the events witnessed today, with video evidence recorded by at least 3 members of this congregation. Her voice rang with clarity, conviction in every syllable. She turned to me. Ma. Carter, are you willing to file a formal complaint? I did not answer right away, not because I was unsure, but because the weight of the moment deserved silence before truth. I stood, slowly, for most of my life. I began. I believed dignity was something you carried inside, no matter what the world tried to take from you. And I still believe that. I looked around. No one looked away this time. But I have also learned that silence, when partnered with dignity, becomes complicity. I will not be complicit anymore. I turned to Daniel. Yes, I will file. Applause rippled through the room, not loud, not celebratory, but solid, like the town had finally grown a spine. Danielle nodded, then turned to the back of the church, where Officer Dawson had slipped in again. Perhaps out of arrogance, perhaps to show he was not afraid. He stood near the doorway like a guard at the edge of a crumbling empire. "Officer Dawson," she called out, her voice calm but slicing. "I am informing you in front of these witnesses that a complaint has been filed against you for unlawful use of force, public misconduct, and racial profiling. Effective immediately. Your badge and weapon are to be surrendered to your commanding officer, pending an internal affairs investigation." His eyes widened. He had not expected her to do it publicly, but Daniel knew exactly what she was doing. She was not just holding him accountable. She was setting a precedent. A hush fell again as a tall, broad-shouldered black man in a sheriff's uniform stepped forward from the rear. Captain Ellis Monroe, head of internal affairs for Eastwood PD. He was a man who had spent his life playing chess in a world that kept flipping the board. And today, he would finally corner the king. Captain Monroe approached Dawson. Hand extended. "Badge. Rich," he said. "Right now." Dawson hesitated for one long moment. He looked out over the pews, searching for someone to come to his defense. No one stood. Not even the other officers in the room. Not even the mayor, who had quietly slipped in during the commotion and now stood, hands behind his back. Expression blank. Dawson's lips curled, his pride leaking from every corner of his stiff jawline. But he pulled the badge from his chest, and then the gun from his holster. He handed them both over. A symbol. A collapse. And just like that, the man who had shoved me was no longer above the law. He was under it. As Monroe walked away, Daniel turned back to the crowd. Let this moment be remembered, not as a punishment, but as a correction. Justice is not revenge. It is responsibility. My knees trembled slightly as I sat again, not from fear, but from release. I felt Elijah's spirit beside me, proud. He had always said that God worked through ordinary people in extraordinary ways. Today, a grieving brother, a brave lawyer, and a room full of long silent neighbors became that miracle. As the choir slowly stood and began humming Amazing Grace, I closed my eyes. And for the first time since I had landed in Eastwood, I was not thinking of escape. I was thinking of what could finally begin. The next morning, my porch was covered in envelopes. They were tucked into the railing, slipped under the mat, taped to the screen door. Some were scrawled in shaky cursive, others typed in bold ink with city letterheads. Condolences. Apologies. Promises of change. A few were sincere. Most were safe. The mayor's letter arrived with a bouquet. It read like something drafted by a staffer. We deeply regret the distress caused during Reverend Elijah Carter's memorial service. Officer Dawson's behavior does not reflect the values of Eastwood. There was no mention of me, just what I represented. Later that day, the police chief came by in person. Chief Donnelly. Silver hair, eyes like steel bolts. He carried a folder of official statements and a face full of political regret. "We are placing Dawson on indefinite suspension, pending further investigation," he said. "Public relations is handling the messaging." Messaging. That is what they cared about. Not repentance. Not healing. Just controlling the story before it spread too far past Eastwood's boundaries. He offered his hand. I did not take it. "Chief," I said quietly, "when you apologize to a man, you look him in the eye and say his name, not his distress, not his experience. You say his name." He looked down. "I am sorry, Ma." "Carter." I gave him a nod. Nothing more. Then came the cameras. News trucks rolled in from Atlanta, even as far as Dances. The story had made headlines overnight. Retired war hero humiliated at brother's funeral, officer faces disciplinary action. They wanted interviews, wanted me to sit in front of a neutral backdrop and relive the moment again and again. I declined every request, because none of this was ever about attention. It was about dignity, and no camera could give me back what Dawson had tried to strip from me. Instead, I went to Elijah's gravesite. No press, no crowd, just me and the hum of summer cicadas. I knelt before the headstone, brushed away some fallen leaves, and placed my hand gently on the earth. I did what I could. I whispered, "You always said justice begins at the smallest act of truth. Maybe I finally found mine." A breeze passed through the trees. I imagined him laughing, saying, "Took you long enough." That night, I lit a single candle in the window of my house, a tradition my mother used to keep when someone in the family passed a beacon for their spirit to find peace. And as I stood there watching its flame flicker against the glass, I realized something. I did not need their apologies. Not the mayor's, not the chief's, not even the town's. What I needed, what I had earned, was to reclaim my name. To walk through my hometown without their projections weighing me down. To be seen not as a threat or a shadow or a mistake, but simply as Jerome L. Carter. Veteran. Brother. Man. The town had started whispering less. Some even waved again. But I did not need their validation. I had carried this country's burdens in silence for too long to seek comfort from the same hands that once turned away. Still, something had shifted. People no longer looked through me. They looked at me. And when children passed my yard on their bikes, they did not speed up. They slowed down. Pointed. "That is Ma." Carter's house. There was no more shame in their eyes. Just wonder. Respect. And maybe, just maybe, hope. The house was still the same. Same creaky porch steps. Same screen door that whined like an old dog every time it opened. Same coffee pot that hissed before it brewed like it needed to clear its throat. But something in me had changed. After the funeral, after the confrontation, after the apology I never asked for, Life in Eastwood settled into a quieter rhythm, not the same rhythm. The town still had its habits, but now it paused just a beat longer when I passed by. Heads turned, not with suspicion, but with a kind of reluctant reverence. I took my walks early in the morning before the Georgia sun could press its weight on the town. That was my ritual, down Magnolia Street, past the library where Elijah used to read Bible stories to kids, then to the old community garden we built in our youth with scrap wood and borrowed tools. The kids had started calling me Sir Carter. It started as a joke from one of the boys riding a rusty Beck's. "Morning, Sir Carter," he would said with a salute. I gave him a nod. "You better earn that title before you go giving it away, son." He laughed, but the name stuck. Now the neighborhood echoed with it. I never asked for it, but deep down, I think Elijah would have loved it. Every now and then, someone would stop me, usually older folks. Some veterans. Sometimes a mother holding a baby on her hip. "Thank you for standing up," they would say, and I would answer the same way every time. I did not do it for me. I did it for him. Because that was the truth. It had never been about revenge. It had been about restoration. Elijah's church started a new fund in his name, the Carter Community Grant, for kids who could not afford college, or needed a suit for their first interview, or just a meal. I donated anonymously, but the pastor knew, and he smiled wider when he saw me on Sundays. I started going back to church. Not every Sunday, but more than I had in years. I sat in the back, where I could see the whole room, and remember Elijah standing up front with that crooked grin and open arms. Sometimes I thought I saw him, standing there still. Grief never leaves, but it softens. Like scar tissue it remains, but the pain dulls. What remains is what matters. I hung the medal in my living room, not in a display case, just on a nail, plain and simple. It used to stay buried in a drawer, under old passports and faded photographs. Now it faced the sunlight, not as a trophy, but as a memory, a reminder that dignity, once reclaimed, must never again be hidden. One afternoon, I got a letter from Danielle Hayes. Typed, professional, but personal. She wrote, "I used to think justice was about big courtroom wins. Now I realize it is about small truths being spoken in rooms that forgot how to listen. Thank you for helping me remember." I read it twice. Then I tucked it behind the frame of Clara's photo on the mantel. The world had not changed overnight, but it was changing. Dawson had not been seen in town since his badge was taken. Rumor was he would moved south. No one missed him. But I did not gloat, because even he was just a symptom, and symptoms are treated by truth. My porch became a gathering place again. Kids would come ask me stories. Veterans dropped by to sip coffee and talk about old wounds. The same people who once ignored me now leaned in close when I spoke, not because I was loud, but because I was finally heard. And one evening, as I sat watching the fireflies rise from the grass like little spirits returning home, I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind you fight for, the kind you earn, the kind that stays. It was a Thursday morning when I returned to the cemetery. Same boots, same slow walk past rows of stone, names half worn by time. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and memory. I stood in front of Elijah's grave, hands folded behind my back. His headstone was clean, a fresh bouquet of white lilies resting at its base. Someone else had been here before me. That thought warmed my chest. I knelt, placed my hand flat on the stone. I kept my word. Brother, the words came easily now. No lump in the throat, no ache in the ribs. Just clarity. They tried to quiet me. They tried to define me. But in the end, I spoke. I sat for a long while, watching a squirrel dart between trees. The world moved gently around me. And in that moment, I understood something I would missed all those years. Silence is not peace. Silence is a cage. And I had lived caged for far too long. When I finally stood, I felt no weight on my shoulders, just breath in my lungs and legacy in my steps. Back home, the porch was bathed in sunlight. I sat in the old rocking chair Clara once claimed as her favorite. I could almost hear her hum again, sweet and low. Then, a knock at the gate. A teenage girl I recognized, Marcy. She would been at the funeral. Quiet. Wide-eyed. She clutched a notebook to her chest like it was armor. "Ma. Carter?" she asked. Voice unsure. "Yes, madam," I replied. "Can I ask you something?" "For school. I am doing a project on local heroes. We are supposed to write about someone who changed things." I raised an eyebrow, and you picked me. She nodded. "What happened at the church? It changed the way I see things. I think it changed the town too." I chuckled softly. "Well, I do not know about hero. I just spoke when I could not be quiet any longer. But that is the point," she said. "You spoke." I looked at her, this girl, barely old enough to know injustice, yet already reaching for truth. "Come on up then," I said, patting the step beside me. "I will tell you what I can, but you better take notes, my memories, like a leaky faucet." She laughed, and we sat there as the sun crawled across the porch, and I began to tell her about Montgomery, about Elijah, about Beirut, about the medal, about Dawson, about how justice is not a gavel, but a whisper that grows louder when enough good people decide they have heard enough lies. I told her how the strongest people I ever met did not wear uniforms, they wore aprons, or robes, or calloused hands from decades of unseen labor. I told her what my father once told me: never let someone else's small mind determine your worth. And when I was done, she looked at me with something I did not see much anymore: hope. That night, I wrote a letter, not to the mayor, not to the chief, to the children of Eastwood. I asked Danielle to read it at the next youth assembly. It ended like this: "Don't let the world tell you when to speak. Speak when it matters. Speak even when your voice shakes. Because silence is not safety, it is surrender. And you were not born to surrender." I signed it, folded it once, sealed it with care. The candle still burns in my window each night, not for grief now, but for guidance. For anyone still wandering through injustice, unsure whether their voice matters. It does. Mine did, and I am just one man, in a quiet town where silence once protected the comfortable and punished the truth. One man, Jerome Lell. Carter, a retired war hero. Grieving brother and lifelong servant of justice, broke through years of prejudice with nothing more than his voice and the courage to finally use it. What began as a funeral became a turning point. A shove turned into a spotlight, and a medal, once hidden, became a mirror that forced an entire town to look at itself. But this story was never about a medal. It was about dignity, about legacy, about a man who refused to let his silence be mistaken for weakness, a man who stood up not for attention, but for his brother, for justice, for the next generation. Your story matters even if the world tries to erase it. You do not need a title, a badge, or a spotlight to speak truth. You just need the bravery to stand, even if your voice shakes. And when you do not just change your own life, you give permission for others to rise with you. Because silence is not peace. Silence is surrender. And we were not born to surrender. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or reminded you of someone you love, subscribe to our channel for more powerful, real-life inspired dramas. Leave a comment what part of Jerome's story hit home for you. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder. Your voice can change everything. Be the light in someone's silence.